Eldridge was a small town, quiet and unassuming, but it held a secret. On the edge of the woods stood a house, an old, abandoned house. It loomed over the town like a watchful sentinel. The locals feared it. They whispered about it in hushed tones. No one dared to go near it. The house had been there for generations. Its windows were dark and empty. The paint was peeling off its weathered walls. Vines crept up the sides as if nature was trying to reclaim it. The roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. It seemed to groan in the wind. On stormy nights, strange noises came from the house. Some said they heard whispers. Others swore they saw lights flickering in the windows, but no one lived there. No one had lived there for decades. The town's older residents told stories. Stories of the family that once called it home. But those stories were vague and conflicting. The house stood as a reminder of secrets long buried, of mysteries unsolved. It was a place where shadows lingered even in broad daylight, where the air felt thick with unspoken words, and where time seemed to stand still. The people of Eldridge learned to live with it, to ignore it, but they never forgot it was there. David was different from the other townspeople. He was curious, adventurous. The house had always fascinated him. Since he was a child, he'd wondered about its secrets. Now, at 18, he was determined to uncover them. His friends thought he was crazy. His parents warned him to stay away. But David couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. On a particularly gloomy evening, David made his decision. Rain pelted the windows of his room. Thunder rumbled in the distance. It was the perfect night for an adventure. He packed a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook. His heart raced with excitement and a hint of fear. He knew he was breaking every rule, every warning he'd ever been given. As he slipped out of his house, the rain soaked him instantly. The wind whipped around him, carrying whispers of caution. But David pressed on. The streets were empty. The town was silent. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. David as David. With each step towards the house, my resolve grew stronger. He could see it now. Looming ahead, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating its decrepit form for a brief moment. David paused at the edge of the property. This was his last chance to turn back, to return to safety, but the mystery called to him. With a deep breath, he stepped onto the overgrown path, towards the house that had haunted his dreams for years. The porch creaked under David's feet. It was rotting, unsafe. He tested each step carefully. The front door loomed before him. It was massive, made of solid oak. Years of weather had warped it. David as David. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out. He grasped the cold, rusted doorknob. It turned with a groan that seemed to echo through the night. The door swung open. David hesitated on the threshold. The interior was pitch black. His flashlight beam seemed weak against the oppressive darkness. Musty air rushed out, carrying the scent of decay. David swallowed hard. He stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath him. Dust swirled in the beam of his flashlight. The entryway was grand once. Now it was a shadow of its former self. Cobwebs hung like ghostly curtains. A chandelier, tarnished and broken, hung precariously overhead. David's footsteps echoed in the empty space. He swept his light around, revealing peeling wallpaper and cracked plaster. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision. David as David, each room told a story of abandonment, of lives suddenly interrupted. In the living room, furniture sat covered in sheets, like silent ghosts watching his every move. The kitchen was a mess of rusted appliances and broken dishes. Upstairs, bedrooms stood frozen in time, toys left mid-play, clothes still hanging in closets. It was as if the family had simply vanished. Leaving everything behind, the air grew heavier with each discovery. David felt a growing sense of unease, but his curiosity drove him onward, towards the one place he hadn't yet explored, the basement. The basement door stood at the end of a long hallway. It was different from the others, heavier, darker. David as David. A chill ran down my spine as I approached it. The door seemed to absorb the light from his flashlight. He reached for the handle. It was ice cold to the touch. With a deep breath, he turned it. The door swung open with an ominous creak. A set of steep stairs descended into darkness. The air that rushed up was damp and frigid. David's flashlight barely penetrated the gloom. He took the first step, then another. The stairs groaned under his weight. Halfway down, he paused. He could have sworn he heard something. A whisper. So faint he might have imagined it, but it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. At the bottom of the stairs, David swept his light around. The basement was larger than he expected. Shelves lined the walls filled with dusty jars and boxes. Old furniture was piled in corners. Sheets covered mysterious shapes. In the center of the room stood a large wooden chest. It seemed out of place, too new, too clean. David approached it slowly. His heart pounded in his chest. David as David. The chest wasn't locked. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside he found stacks of old photographs, yellowed with age but still clear. They showed a family, happy faces, a mother, a father, 2 children. But as he flipped through them, the images changed. The smiles faded. The eyes grew haunted. The last photo made David gasp. The family stood in front of the house, but they were transparent, like ghosts. Beneath the photos lay a leather-bound book, a diary. David picked it up, his curiosity overcoming his growing fear. He knew he was about to uncover the house's darkest secrets.
David stumbled back from the chest. His flashlight flickered. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision. He needed to get out, now. He turned towards the stairs, but they seemed farther away. The room felt larger, distorted, as if the very walls were stretching, changing.
David's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the oppressive silence. He took a step towards the stairs, then another, but it felt like wading through molasses. The air was thick, resisting his every move. David's breath came in short, panicked gasps. He could feel the house fighting him, trying to hold him back, to keep him here in this basement with the others.
The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer indistinct. He could make out words now. Pleas, warnings, threats.
The flashlight sputtered, died, plunging David into total darkness. He let out a strangled cry, fumbled to turn it back on. When the beam finally flickered to life, David froze. The stairs were gone. Where they had been was now a solid wall, ancient, decrepit, but undeniably real. He was trapped. The house had sealed him in, just as it had done to the Eldridge family all those years ago.
David spun around, desperate for another way out, but the basement had changed. The cluttered space was now a vast, empty room. The chest was gone, the shelves, everything except for the whispers and the shadows. They were moving now, taking shape. David could see faces forming in the darkness, familiar faces, the Eldridge family, but twisted, hungry. Their eyes glowed with an unholy light, and they were all focused on him.
David screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the hungry darkness. The house had him now, and it wasn't letting go.
The whispers surrounded David, a cacophony of voices, pleading, demanding, promising. He could make out individual words now.
Join us, they said. Become one with the house. End our loneliness.
David pressed his hands against his ears, but the voices were inside his head now, impossible to shut out. They spoke of release, of power, of eternal life within the house's walls. David's mind reeled. He could feel the house's influence seeping into him, like icy tendrils wrapping around his thoughts, his will. Part of him wanted to give in, to surrender to the whispers, to end the fear and uncertainty. But another part fought back, desperately clinging to his sense of self, to the world outside these walls. He thought of his family, his friends, the life he'd left behind just hours ago.
The shadows grew more solid. The Eldridge family took shape before him, but they were no longer the smiling faces from the photographs. They were twisted, corrupted, their eyes hollow pits of darkness, their mouths gaping holes that continued to whisper, to tempt, to threaten.
They reached for David with insubstantial hands. He could feel their cold touch even through their ghostly forms. They were pulling at him, trying to draw him in.
David stumbled backwards. His back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to run. The house seemed to pulse around him, alive, hungry. The whispers rose to a fevered pitch. The shadows closed in. David could feel himself slipping away, his memories growing dim, his sense of self fading. He tried to call out, to scream, but no sound came. The darkness was absolute now, all-consuming.
David Eldridge. That was his name now. Had always been his name. He was home. He was part of the house. And the house was part of him forever.
In the world outside, the storm raged on. Lightning illuminated the old house on the hill. For a brief moment, a figure could be seen in the basement window. A young man, his face a mask of terror. Then darkness fell again, and he was gone, as if he had never been there at all. The house stood silent, unchanging, but somehow more menacing than before.
Days passed. David's family grew frantic. Search parties combed the woods, the town. But there was no trace of him. No one thought to look in the old Eldridge house. It was forbidden, cursed.
Eventually, the searches stopped. Life in the small town of Eldridge tried to return to normal, but there was a new tension in the air. A sense of unease that wouldn't go away. Weeks turned to months, months to years.
David became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to keep children in line.
Don't go near the old house, parents would say, or you'll disappear like David did.
But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could imagine. David hadn't just disappeared. He had been absorbed, consumed, become one with the very thing that had taken him.
Inside the house, in the depths of the basement, David's consciousness lingered. A whisper among whispers, a shadow among shadows. He was part of the Eldridge family now, part of the house's eternal hunger. And he waited, patient, watchful, for the next curious soul who would dare to cross the threshold, for the cycle to begin anew.
The house had claimed him, and through him it had grown stronger, more alluring, more dangerous than ever before. Years passed, but the mystery of the Eldridge house only deepened. The town tried to move on, to forget. But on stormy nights when the wind howled and the rain lashed against the windows, whispers could still be heard, faint, elusive, and those who listened closely could almost hear the echoes of a young man's voice, forever trapped, forever a part of the house. The Eldridge house stood as a grim reminder of the unknown, of the things that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding, and it waited, ever patient, for its next visitor, for the cycle to begin anew.